Thank you all for being here and welcome. I'm excited to be here and supporting this presentation on NRCS support for organic and transitioning producers with this wonderful group of speakers here. We're just going to do a few quick introductions first for each of us. I'm Marina Oriel and I work for Oregon Tilth. I'm the Conservation Program Manager, and much of my work is focused around working within NRCS and with NRCS staff, providing organic training and resources and assistance to help them better support organic producers. Raeanne.
So my name is Raeanne Bettencourt. I am the Small Farms and Organic Specialist for Eastern Oregon. There's not a lot of organic over there, but we're slowly transitioning into getting more outreach out there. So my position's been fairly new. I've been a soil con for the last 3.5 years, and in the last year, a little over a year, I got this new position. And these are just some pictures. So I do the soil health trailer, and these are some of our smaller farms. I do some cut flowers, so some producers like to send me home with some pretty flowers, and then those two kiddos up there keep me kind of busy outside of work. So
I think next, that's me. Hi everyone, my name is Stephanie Payne. I'm an urban conservationist with NRCS, and I cover the Portland metro area, so just right over the river here. I've been doing that for the last year or so. Before that, I was a small farm and organic specialist for NRCS based out of Central Oregon.
My name is Becca Anderson Bellanca. Throw all the names in there. I'm the small farms and urban agriculture specialist for Washington NRCS. So I'm based out of Olympia, but I do cover the whole state. And I started in Texas and then I came up here. So that's what the Gators are from. So rolling into the presentation, who is NRCS, right? It's this whole alphabet soup that is consistent with the government, right? And so NRCS stands for the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We are a sub-agency under USDA. And so what we do is we provide technical and financial assistance to farmers, ranchers, backyard gardeners, just about anybody. And so technical and financial assistance, what does that mean? Technical assistance is basically where somebody gives us a call, gives us an email, and reaches out and says, hey, I have this need, my crops are not doing so well in the wet, boggy, cold conditions that we tend to have here in the winter. I need a high tunnel. I have this weed out in my pasture. I have no idea what it is or how to get rid of it, but my cows won't eat it. What do I do? So after that, call, we have office in every single county, in every single state in the country. And so there's always somebody local there to provide assistance to you. So you call your local person, they run out, they make a visit with you to your farm, your ranch, your backyard, whatever it might be, and talk about solutions to the issues that you have out there, right? Financial assistance is where we can hopefully turn some of these solutions that we talk about with the farmers, the producers, all y'all sitting out there, how to fund those with our different financial assistance programs that are funded through the Farm Bill and the Inflation Reduction Act. And we are also non-regulatory, and which means we can't make you do what you don't want to do on your place. And participation with us is fully voluntary. Who do we help? We help everyone. Anybody interested in conservation, right? So farmers, ranchers, backyard gardeners, tribes, nonprofits, LLCs, community gardens, anybody can come to us for assistance. There's no minimum size, right? And so we help people who have containers in their backyards, just like we help people on 100,000-acre ranches. And you can be a landowner or a tenant on a piece of ground. You do not have to own the land that you are farming on in order to request assistance from us. And so the big thing people come to us for a lot of times is financial assistance, right? Like, it's expensive to be a farmer. And so we have two main financial assistance programs. And so one is EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and the other is CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program. The EQIP really covers bigger infrastructure level practices that are more expensive to undertake, right? Things like fences, watering facilities, high tunnels, big tree planting projects, things like that, that do take a lot out of your pocketbook. And the reimbursements are set rate reimbursements. So you know how much you're going to be reimbursed per square foot of high tunnel that you install, per linear foot of fence that you install. You know how much you're going to be reimbursed for that before you go into an application or a contract with us. And contracts are generally 1 to 3 years. For CSP, this is a conservation stewardship program. And so normally folks get enrolled in this program once you already have an established management system out there. You know, you've been growing crops for a couple of years, you've been running animals for a couple of years, and so you're already doing a good job. But you want to do an even better job. And so we're basically saying, you're meeting this, you know, really great like stewardship level, and we want to get you to the next level. So folks implement what are called enhancements, or like practices plus, or practices with a little sparkle, right? And so the way I kind of differentiate that is through equip. Somebody might install something like a hedgerow, right? And so for a screen, for wind protection, for wildlife, whatever it might be. And through CSP, you might enhance that same hedgerow, and you could diversify it, you could lengthen it, you could widen it, right? You can basically make it a little more sparkly. And so instead of being reimbursed after you complete a practice, right? So through equip, you build your high tunnel, and then we reimburse you for that. Through CSP, you get one big annual payment at the end of each year. And CSP contracts are generally 5 years long.
So within eQuip, there are two separate fund pools, specifically for organic and transitioning to organic producers. So I'll share just a little bit about how each of those work. The eQuip Organic Initiative is a separate fund pool within eQuip for certified organic, transitioning to organic, or certification exempt producers. So there are fewer applicants within that pool. So the idea is that they might have a better chance of being funded for their application. It includes practices that are available within a given state through general eQuip. And then there is the eQuip Organic Transition Initiative. So this one is just for producers who are transitioning to organic. And it does require currently that the plan include an 823 organic management practice, which I will share a little bit more about later on, or these two other practices here, which we'll also share more about later on, CPA 138, DIA 140, and apologies for the acronyms, but those are planned with a technical service provider, so a third-party business or individual outside of NRCS who is able to implement conservation plans as well. You can have these 823 organic management or these other plans with a technical service provider paired with other supporting practices. So those would be like the foundation of your contract, and then you can add in other practices like a hedgerow or like cover crops as well. And it can be contracted throughout the entire transition period. So if you are a transitioning to organic producer and you have 1 year left of transition, or if you're just starting out and you have 3 years left, you can contract through the eQuip Organic Transition Initiative for the entirety of your transition period. Back to Becca.
So up on the screen are some pretty common practices that we see installed on cropland acres and on acres where folks are running livestock. So I'm just going to run through a bunch of these really quick, and then we're going to go a little bit more in depth on them. On cropland, we see a lot of high tunnels, low tunnels, hedgerows, mulching, cover crops, crop rotation, no-till and reduced-till, pollinators, micro-irrigation, forest farming, which is basically underplanting forests with other production trees, windbreaks, raised beds, nutrient management, pest management, soil carbon amendment, rainwater catchment, very important in Oregon especially, and organic management, which is the basis of what we're talking about today. On grazing acres, we see a lot of cross-fencing, and so this is very exciting with a lot of updates, so we'll go into more. Livestock pipelines, troughs, heavy use areas, prescribed grazing, pasture and range planting, silvopasture, buffers, brush management, nutrient management, waste storage structures, gutters and downspouts, pre-commercial thinning on forested acres that are also grazed, tree and shrub establishment, mulching, fire breaks, wildlife habitat, more organic management, annual forages for grazing, and a new practice for non-ruminant livestock outdoor management of vegetative cover, which basically means non-ruminants. So think poultry, think pigs, think horses, and how they manage the forages on site between scratching them and creating bare ground and also grazing them down. So we can see that the practices that we have are many and varied, and they do also have specific requirements.
Okay. So Becca just went through a litany of conservation practices that we offer, and it doesn't even scratch the surface. We have, I don't even know how many, do you know off the top of your head? Over 100, and each of those have different scenarios underneath them. So today we're just gonna focus on the ones that we thought were most relevant to organic and organic transitioning producers, but just know that if you don't see it here, we might still have it. So one of the big ones that we see, folks we work with are installing high tunnels. So I'm gonna go a little bit more in depth into some of the ones that we saw on that list. So for high tunnel systems, if you're contracting that with NRCS, we require that they be purchased new from a manufacturer. So although we love reduce, reuse, recycle, for all of our practices, we require that new materials are purchased. You cannot use used equipment. It has to be at least 6 feet tall down the midline, and 6 mil greenhouse grade plastic at their minimum. You're more than welcome to get something thicker than that or have different treatments on the plastic, but that's the minimum requirement. And then we also require that the crops that are grown in the high tunnel are in the natural soil profile. You can do raised beds up to about a foot, for ADA compliance, we might be able to request a variance to get those installed. I know some other folks have done that in the past. I haven't done that, but I know that is an option. But no tabletop growing. These aren't meant to be prop houses. You can heat them and add electric if you want. We just don't pay extra for it. And I also want to mention too, and I don't know if this is true, so for NRCS, each state kind of operates a little bit differently. We have different requirements. In Oregon, we're now requiring that anybody who is going to get a high tunnel paid by us or in a contract with us requires a proof of like a legal water right. So this could be municipal water or any sort of commercial well. So we do require that now for contracting. Low tunnel system. So this is a new practice for us. Just starting to implement these. They're so similar to high tunnels. They're mainly used for season extension. They could be up to 4 feet tall, but anything down to ground cover. So this could include, like the ground cover could also include shade cloth and pest exclusion, the netting, and then your cat tunnels, the caterpillar tunnels up to 4 feet tall, sorry. If using the hoops, they must, if they're metal hoops, they need to be 9 or 10 gauge or greater, but you could also use PVC or electric conduit for that. And then if it is gonna be a plastic cover on those, we require that at least be 4 mil greenhouse grade plastic. Soil liming, this is also a new one for us. So I know in Oregon, especially on the east side, probably all over the state and up in Washington as well, our soils, our natural soils can be rather acidic. So we've added this to the repertoire of conservation practices that we can offer. Before we contract this or before we put the line down, we require that a soil test has been completed to show and to verify that the soil is acidic and to determine an appropriate application rate. We could, once we get this information, we can use calculators to determine how much that rate is going to be. And that's something that we can help you with. Soil carbon amendment. So this is anything from compost to biochar and other things like, I'm gonna mispronounce this, bagasse. I've only seen it spelled out, bagasse? The gas? Okay, yeah. And basically anything that's going to have a high carbon content, so adding that to a soil as an amendment. Things about this practice, similar to the liming, we require that a soil test is completed, so we make sure we're not over applying compost or biochar in a way that's going to contribute to any runoff or groundwater leaching. We also require that the compost and the biochar, whatever the soil carbon amendment is, that it has been tested by an approved lab. So, yeah. Oh, are we doing questions? Right? Yeah, happy to answer.
So Washington State recently enacted an incentive for paying for compost, but it has to be finished compost from a licensed compost maker. We make our own. We buy dairy solids from a dairy farmer. Is there any room for that in the NRCS program, or does it have to be a finished product?
For this, it has to be finished. And we do require that if it's on farm, that you get it tested. And so long as it meets our requirements and the standards, and I don't know what all the different levels are off the top of my head, but we have a list of things that it needs to be tested for. And so long as it meets those requirements and it's tested by an approved lab, I believe we can use the, do I have that, am I having that right? Yes. I haven't contracted that before, so I haven't run into that instance, but.
So dairy solids might?
Dairy solids, so long as they are properly composted according to our specifications, and I can totally connect with you afterwards and shoot you that information for what our specifications are and what all needs to be tested within it. And we do have maximum parameters for things like E. coli for, compost specifically, if that makes sense.
We'll talk later.
Cool. Thank you, Becca. And I don't think it's on this list, but we also have a practice available, soil and source nutrient testing that could help pay for that testing to be done. And all these practices that I'm mentioning here, they're all available under the Organic Initiative and the Organic Transition Initiative. They're like the two fund pools, at least in Oregon, where all of the conservation practices that we have available we can contract. So yeah, going back to soil carbon amendment, let's see, did I miss anything? No.
Biochar is the same. You can produce it on-site or off-site, but if you're producing it on-site, you do need to meet all of our requirements for it. Mm-hmm. So again, we can shoot that over to anybody who wants it.
Yes, definitely, thank you. Raised beds, this is another new one. I haven't yet worked with it. I'm just started getting folks interested in it, but these could be anything from like the raised beds that you see pictured here, from 6 inches to 24 inches tall, or they can be unframed raised beds, but we do have cost share available now. But we can only currently contract raised beds if there is some evidence of contamination or debris in the native soil profile.
There are two kind of avenues to use this, right? And so the one that it was really written for and intended for was contamination or debris. So specifically for urban areas, very important, but also in our rural areas that have industrial history on them. Let's think our orchard lands in the central areas of both of our states, I believe.
Yes.
That's very, very important. And so I believe both states now have a PXRF, which is basically a ray gun that you shoot laser beams at the soil and it tells you what is in your soil, both in terms of macronutrients like NPK, but also in terms of uranium and stuff like that too. Yeah. And so very helpful, very useful. And so people who are interested can come talk to us. And then also, we can use this in the case where there are soil emitting factors like root restrictive layers, for example, where there are saltwater seeps along the coastlines, things like that. And so it's not only, yes, sir.
What about just being really, really wet?
It depends.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, can you use it where it's really, really wet? I would say it depends. So we can talk about specifics.
Yeah.
It depends, because that can be a soil emitting factor.
Yes, and another thing to mention too, and this is true for all of the practices that we're talking about here, is that we're not, even though we're USDA and there's the certification, USDA Organic certified, we're not certifying agents, so we can't tell you what you need to do to be in compliance with the National Organic Program. But we can highlight some things like, for the raised beds. Well, we can just make sure to tell you to check into it to make sure that it's in compliance. If working with if you've got a certifying agent, if you're going to put any of these raised beds, that they're organic, approved by Raeanne. All right, so cover crop and conservation crop rotation, they kind of go together. So cover crop is, there's a lot of different definitions, but according to NRCS, this is an annual crop that's terminated prior to setting seed. It's not used commercially. It's not considered a cash crop. If you're harvesting it for any reasons for cash crop purposes, we won't consider it a cover crop. But we plan this typically, especially on organic systems, for weed suppression, help increase the soil organic matter, decrease compaction, and help to mitigate any erosion issues that might be of a concern. And that kind of leads into conservation crop rotation. This is basically us paying you to manage your crop rotation so that we're reducing the amount of soil exposure, or the length of time that the soil is exposed. So that's kind of where the cover crop can come into play. Those downtimes where it makes sense to put in a cover crop. And also it can be used to help break pest and disease cycles, making sure you're not planting the same family of crop over and over again in the same field. And we help you develop a rotation plan. We know things change. So this is kind of like a living document, and it's mostly to incentivize the documentation and just thinking about that crop rotation and thinking about all those parameters and getting paid to keep track of it all, and then have a conversation with us at the end of the season about how it went and maybe what we could do differently, or what you could do differently next year. Okay. So these next three, there is some overlap. They're all conservation cover, hedgerow planting, wildlife habitat planting. These are all perennial plantings. Like I said, they kind of have some overlap with their purposes, but conservation cover is specifically herbaceous cover. And this can include things like very specifically for pollinator species. We have a specific scenario just for monarch habitat. Hedgerows, this could be both woody and herbaceous species. And I think Becca mentioned it earlier, this could be for multiple different purposes, whether it be for pollinators or windbreaks, or maybe even chemical drift breaks. I don't think it's on here, but we also have a tree shrub planting that might be applicable as well. And then the wildlife habitat planting is very similar as well, but very specifically for wildlife habitat, depending on what your target species is. And then we can plan this wherever it makes sense to do so, whether it's in the middle of a field, as you can see in the slide here, or on the edges of fields, field corners, or even in like the farmstead areas if you're wanting to increase like the on-farm biodiversity. Oh, we do have the tree shrub, great. Okay, so these suites of practices, these are kind of acting like supporting practices for the ones that you saw on the previous slide. So a lot of those plantings will also plan these other practices alongside it, and that's tree and shrub site preparation. So basically just prepping the site for the tree and the shrub planting, removing existing vegetation if need be. Mulching, putting that down after we do the planting to help with soil moisture retention, weed pressure, things like that. Herbaceous weed treatment, this could be before and after, making sure we're reducing that weed competition where we are establishing a new planting. And then brush management is along the same lines, but dealing more with like the woody structures and removing them. Micro irrigation is another one that we see often. And I don't know the scale of farmers. So this is obviously the micro irrigation, a lot of smaller farms, but we also have practices for, it's just sprinkler irrigation, like pivots and linears and things like that if you are a larger scale operation. But as far as micro irrigation goes, we do have some requirements to help you move from, say if it's just like a hand line or hose to micro. We have to show that there's some sort of water savings that is gonna, we're conserving water. We also have to show that the footprint of where we're gonna put that micro irrigation has been irrigated 2 out of the last 5 years. We have to show that there's a legal water right to use that water for irrigation. And then one more. Oh yeah, so we also require that a water quality test be done on the water source, just in case we need to size a filter a certain way if there was any debris or anything else that might affect the filter. Yes.
So a lot of these look to be fairly labor intensive, and so we did a high tunnel this year. So high tunnel reimbursement is X dollars, but then you need to pay someone to assemble it. So that's probably 50% of X dollars. So are all of these things, I'm not going to hire someone else, I'll have my crew do it, but does reimbursement include the labor cost, or is it just like the high tunnel, it's just the materials that you get?
Yeah, that is an excellent question, and I think NRCS works a lot differently from most like grants and like other organizations that give out money for these projects. It is a set cost share rate, and regardless of if you install a practice or if you hire somebody to put in the high tunnel, say, at the end of the day, all we're making sure is that it's installed according to our specifications. So and that cost share rate doesn't change. So built into that cost share rate should be labor. And I'd encourage you, if you ever have participated with NRCS or will in the future, our payment rates are based on averages across Oregon, California, and Washington. And our economists decide what those cost share rates based on the feedback that we get from the field and receipts. So if you're up for sharing that information, if you're like, this cost share rate isn't reflective of, like I'm paying like way more out of pocket, it helps us if you could give those receipts, and then we can bring that to the economists. That's the only way we're going to get them changed, because it's determined on a national level.
So within all the high tunnel scenarios is included labor and transportation and materials, and so a Quonset tunnel is going to be substantially less reimbursement than a Gothic high tunnel, for example, because most of the time the Gothic has the trusses built into it, it has the wind bracing built into it, all that. And so exactly what Stephanie was saying, like these numbers do change every year, and so well, there's a couple things that I could say on that, but I will also say that Washington, I'm not sure if Oregon is doing this, but we now have a lot of different reimbursement rates across the state for cost of living adjustments built into it. So that's a new thing for this year that we actually just learned about at our meeting. But yeah, so depending on where you are, you might see higher reimbursement rates if you were to come in this year compared to last year for that cost of living adjustment.
Yes. All of this is public-facing data too, so once they finalize these cost share rates, it's all available on our website to look through. So you can see all the different scenarios and see what NRCS is paying on. So make that very transparent. And if you ever have any questions, you could always reach out to your local NRCS person and we can talk you through it. Rainwater catchment. So yeah, as Becca mentioned, this is pretty popular. So I switched over from being a small farm organic specialist to an urban conservationist. So I'm seeing a lot of this in the Portland metro area. What I've seen is that it might not pencil out for folks that are operating on a large scale, like we're talking acres and not square footage, but if you are more on the square footage side, rainwater harvesting might be an option. The pictures that you see here were taken here in Portland. This is a local producer. She has an acre in a residential area. She's growing on maybe a half an acre of it. She's catching water from her house, and they're being stored in multiple different cisterns. I think she just increased her capacity to about 10,000 gallons, up from 9. No, sorry, up from 7,000. With 7,000 gallons, she was able to not use the municipal water for irrigation that she was on for most of the year. On bad years, she would probably have to turn it on for a few months in the hopes of increasing that storage capacity, was be completely off of that municipal water. So there's a lot of that going on right now. We do have cost share available for that through not just the Organic Initiative and the Organic Transition Initiative, but you're in Portland, there's a very specific fund pool now just for those systems.
I also want to say there are different water laws in Washington and Oregon, and so
Oh yeah, what
I
is
just want to
it?
say that.
You can capture water or no?
So you can, yes,
You can?
but we don't have to have like the same water like rights that you do to like do all of this irrigation, right? Because we have the like 5,000 gallons a day minimum that you can do without a water right.
Oh, cool.
And so again, talk to your local people.
Yeah.
Because we're a cross section of a lot of different places across these two states, and so we do also have this available for producers. And I will also say, like, going from where Raeanne is, like in Eastern Oregon, like they don't get much rain, right? And then we go out to like the whole rainforest, right, where you get nothing but rain. And so like there are certain situations where this makes sense, and there are certain situations where it doesn't.
Yes, most definitely. And I'm just curious, is there anybody farming outside of Oregon or Washington that's here today? Raise a hand. All Oregon or Washington folks? Okay, cool. Yeah, so we said rainwater catchment, but I just wanted to highlight too this, we have cost share rates on the different practices. So it's everything from the pump to the cisterns, to gutters, to even the underground outlets, that you would need to trench for the overflow, to the heavy use area, like the pads underneath the cistern. So those are all different components that we stack together when we're doing these projects to help offset more of the cost for the installation of a rainwater catchment system. And I think that is done. And then I'm going to pass it over to Raeanne, who's going to go more into the livestock-focused conservation practices.
Thanks, Stephanie. So some of the practices I'm about to go over, I don't have as much experience with contracting, so I'm opening up to panelists to add any information they may have more experience with, just so we can cover any questions that might come up. But this is practice standard 382, which is our fencing practice. This can be used anywhere where livestock or wildlife you need to put up a fence to keep them out or to keep them contained, or if it's needed to regulate human access as well. And that can either be barbed or smooth wire. I know in Oregon we've run into an issue where you can't do boundary fences. So if you were to have we want to put up a boundary fence between you and your neighbor's property, we no longer do that just because it becomes an issue on why are they getting paid for that fence when it's also being my use too. So just keep that in mind when you're interested in doing a fence like that, a fencing project like that. That could come into an issue. Yeah, I knew there was going to be something. That's why I opened it up.
There are also scenarios available now for portable electric fence.
So I get a lot of questions. I'm going to take a question right after this. I will get a lot of questions, especially in the urban area, about fencing for security purposes or around cropland. And as it stands now, we do not pay for fencing around cropland to exclude people or wildlife. Yes, that might change in the future. I've talked to your representative.
Okay. So next, we do have a new scenario, and it's our electric fence. So this can either be temporary, and it sounds like you can a portable electric fence as well. So if you're doing a grazing management plan, or you need to move your cattle around, you put a electric fence and you move around with it as you move around your cattle around your property. What I've known and what I've learned with animals is that if you're new to electric fence, it's a requirement that you try to just get the animals used to it within 12 hours. But animals are very smart, and it's said that within 48 hours they're completely trained and they know the electric fence and they stay away from it. And if It's an easy way to tell if they're trained. If they walk up to a fence and they're hesitant to even touch it, that's how you know they're trained. So that's just something to keep in mind, is that your animals are going to be trained fairly quickly with it, just making sure you put it up accurately and well. Anything? Yes.
Yes. In addition to the hot wires for moving around like bigger livestock, also electronet, right, for poultry, for sheep, for hogs, whatever we're talking about. And if we're talking about mixed grazing systems, like with pastured chickens and cows or whatever, like we can look at doing 2 different types of temporary electric fence. So,
Does anybody know about virtual fencing in here? Yes? Okay, cool. It's exciting to see that it's now coming up and now we can cost share on it. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Can you explain it for just a second? Like,
I think
I can't. You're the
she has
livestock.
Becca has a better, I can explain it, but I feel like Becca would probably have a better understanding.
So animals wear collars that are essentially tied to whatever network, whether it's cellular, whether it's wireless. You can also move around different little like mini towers on your property to connect to these different collars, and you essentially on either a like actual computer or on your phone, you can move around where the virtual fences are, right? So you can make different crazy paddock sizes within larger pastures in order to still get the benefit of that higher stocking rates on smaller footprints, right, to benefit the vegetation out there, to benefit the animals out there, without actually having to go out and physically move those fences. So very beneficial in areas that are at high risk of fires, that are through things like forest lands where you are still moving your animals if you have allotments or whatever else. Or for just areas where it's hard to get out every single day, like physically, and you can just move it around on your phone. So it's super cool.
I think a question that's come up across is, does it work in areas where they don't have service? I know in Eastern Oregon we suffer with a lot of areas like mountain ground where the animals go and they'll graze during summer. Like, how does that work without cell phone?
That's where you have little baby towers that you like move around on your properties. Okay. And so it can be issues in areas where you have a lot of canyons and draws where you might lose service with your cow. And so it might be slower to update for where they're at, because you can physically track where each of your animals is at with their collars. So you can have some lag time before they come like up out of the bottom of the canyon. But eventually you can always find them again with it.
So moving on to livestock watering systems. So this is just obviously a system that stores your water for either your livestock or wildlife. And this is available on all land uses where the water source is needed. And this is not intended for ponds, so that's a separate scenario. And if you have something regarding ponds, that's totally something different. So, but that includes like portable troughs, tanks, watering ramps, pumps, and those troughs can be either permanent or temporary. And again, they can be portable. And that also includes like supporting practices like your pipeline and whatnot. The annual forages for grazing systems. So this practice applies to pasture and cropland. Okay. Annual forages are planted as part of the grazing system. This can't be used to establish annual planted and harvested grain, fiber, vegetable, or oilseed crops. And it does not apply on forest land or grazed forest land. And this practice is different from cover crops, which are also alternative annual crops planted, is that this practice allows tighter grazing of the planted forage, while cover crops need to leave for a higher residue on the site. So forage planting practices, so we have 2 of them. So we have our pasture and hay plantings, which is our 512 practice, and then we have our range planting, which is our 550 practice. Our 512 is to establish adopted and compatible species, varieties, or cultivars of perennial herbaceous plants suitable for pasture or hay production. And then our 550, which is our range planting, is for seeding and establishment of herbaceous and woody species for the improvement of vegetation, composition, and productivity of the plant community to meet management goals. So kind of straightforward on that one, those 2. And then these are our grazing practices. We have our 528, which is our prescribed grazing, which is to manage the harvest of vegetation with grazing and or browsing animals with the intent to achieve specific ecological, economical, and management objectives. So this is kind of, you want to have a grazing management plan is our requirement. So either you can do it yourself, we have kind of a template you can follow, or you can hire somebody else out, like a range specialist, to come out and they'll kind of go over your whole operation, your cattle, where they graze and whatnot, and they come up with a grazing management plan, and you implement it, and we go from there. And then we also have our 822, which is, I'm not completely familiar with. I know it's with our non-ruminant livestock outdoor vegetation, veg cover.
It's a mouthful.
It's a long title for something that's pretty, like straightforward. It's just using non-ruminant animals. So that's like your swine, horses, poultry, dogs, cats, all of those fun things. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm taking off, I think.
And we just looked at the time, and I think we're all pretty long-winded, apparently. So we're going to skip straight to the important thing here, which is 823, organic management, which encompasses all of these practices and more.
Yes.
All right, so there is a fairly new practice within NRCS called organic management. And this practice is intended to support managing and improving natural resources on land that is in organic production, land that is certified organic, land that's transitioning to organic. It mirrors many of the organic regulations, so it is intended to align with the organic regulations, but again, NRCS is not the regulatory agency for those regulations, and so in terms of complying with the organic regulations, that should always be between a producer and working with their organic certifier. These are some of the purposes for this practice. So there's a long list of purposes here around improving soil health, reducing soil erosion, reducing transport of pesticides and nutrients, reducing plant pest pressure, enhancing habitat for wildlife, all of these things, improving livestock feed and forage. So again, the practices within organic management or added, you can also stack on additional practices with organic management, and that's something that a producer would work with their NRCS planner to identify what the resource concerns are and what practices best fit the scenario. So whether it's just organic management or organic management plus some additional practices, that'll be determined with NRCS. But I just wanted to show some examples here of how organic management ties into the organic regulation and really mirrors some of those concepts. So with regards to buffers, the organic management standard says protect organic production areas from unintended introduction of prohibited substances through defined boundaries, buffer zones, or diversions. So this should sound familiar to those who are familiar with the organic regulations around protecting land from any unintended introduction of a prohibited substance through drift.
I know, real quick, I think we had a question. I don't know if it's...
Oh, sure.
I was just jumping down to IPM. Would that, for example, help cover the cost of floating row cover for pest exclusion?
I'm gonna pass it.
There's a scenario for that, so it will depend on the situation, but potentially yes. Prevention, avoidance, monitoring, suppression is our integrated pest management go-to, so maybe. Depends. Utilizing National Organic Program allowed pest control materials only when other tactics have not provided needed control is text directly from the organic management practice. And regarding livestock, build and maintain pasture conditions score of 4 or higher. So there are also instances where some of the criteria within organic management tie into NRCS specific measurements and
other things that need to be met for NRCS. So when we talk about things like a pasture condition score, that is going beyond some of the organic regulation requirements. But it does also include this 30% dry matter intake during the grazing season component as well. So all of these things will be tied into an organic management practice to really support that producer in meeting all of these organic requirements. So organic management is specific to land, organically managed land. So like I said, it can be certified organic, it can be transitioning to organic, but when 823 organic management is contracted through the Organic Transition Initiative, and again, this is the fund pool within EQIP that is specific for transitioning to organic producers, it can support funding for attending educational workshops or hiring a mentor or a crop advisor or some other expert to help learn the organic management system. Again, it can be contracted throughout the entire transition period, and for some crops in some locations, and so there is specific calculations that go on within NRCS to determine eligibility for this or not. For transitioning to organic producers, foregone income can also be part of the cost share for this practice. So an additional, an added payment for the foregone income piece to account for any drops in yields that might happen during the transition. Stephanie.
That's me. Okay, so I just wanted to take you through a little bit of the process. If any of this sounds interesting and you're like, I would like to work with NRCS and apply for funding, I'm gonna just kind of overview of what that looks like. Because it's by no means a linear process, so I'm just gonna kind of hit the highlights here. The first thing you're gonna wanna do is to contact us. Like Becca said, there's an NRCS office, maybe not in every county, but like one office might cover many counties, but we have full coverage. So on our website, it's very easy to find your local NRCS person, or you can come up to us and we can help you with that after the presentation. So you contact us, you tell us, what brought you to NRCS, a little bit about your operation, and then typically what happens is that we'll schedule a site visit, because a lot of the information that we gather is just boots on the ground, like really taking a look and looking at everything through a natural resources lens. So we might pick up on things and be able to pair it with programs that we might not otherwise be able to do if we're just having a phone call. We take applications for all of our programs all year long. We do have stopping dates, application deadlines. These vary every year. They vary state to state. This year in Oregon, our application deadline for EQIP is November 29th. Becca, for Washington?
It has passed.
It has passed.
Oh.
So,
But there's always signups for next year. We
Right.
take rolling applications.
and I would encourage, if you're even interested, to put it in application. It obligates you to absolutely nothing. But it is a really great way for us to keep track of you and to let you know when another application deadline is going to be coming up. And yeah, it's just kind of like a bookmark for us. Another thing that happens right from the get-go is to start working with the Farm Services Agency. They're a sister agency under the USDA. They are the keeper of the keys for all farm records. Our software systems talk to their software systems. You're not a farmer until you are a farmer with FSA. So they give you, they will give you a farm and a tract number. If you don't know what that means, it's fine. They'll work through all of that with you. It is document heavy. I promise you, most of that paperwork filling out is like burdensome. It's front loaded, and after you do the big bulk of paperwork, you only have like a form or two to keep up with every year. It's not that bad, but it is kind of bad at the beginning. But like I said, FSA folks will work through that with you and figure out which forms it is that you need to fill out. And then we also start just doing the foundational work of creating a conservation plan. Sometimes this leads to a contract, sometimes it doesn't. Maybe it's just technical assistance. So yeah, I mentioned that application deadline typically happens in the fall, and like I said, varies across the state. Sometimes there's more than one application deadline or different batching periods. Here in Oregon, we typically just have that one, but sometimes there'll be two or many. Something to talk to your NRCS person about. And then after we receive all those applications, when we get to that application deadline, all the applications that we receive up until that point are ranked and assessed against each other. It's a competitive process. We have a lot of funding right now, but it is not infinite. So there is only so much money, it can only go so far. So we rank and assess them. We start pre-approving applications, I know that have ranked up the highest, and then go down that list until we run out of funding. And so that usually happens in the late winter, late calendar year, early next, like this year I think we're doing it like in January or February is our deadline. And then by early spring, you get a notification from us whether or not you've been pre-approved for funding, which is kind of confusing because you're like, you've been pre-approved, and then there's still some more work to do. It's not a set in stone thing at that point, because from then on we're cleaning up that conservation plan. So then you're pre-approved, and then we keep working with you to really dial in that conservation plan, talk about timelines, planned amounts, get our maps like laid out on what the work is going to be. And then we finally sign a contract, and that typically happens in the summer. So you can see our timelines are like really long compared to other sources of funding that you might be able to get within a few weeks or a couple of months. So just kind of keep that in mind. We always suggest, if you're looking to work with us, think about projects that you want to do like a year from now, not next week. Because another thing is that we cannot pay for any projects that are done before you get into a contract. We can't do reimbursements like, oh, I put up a high tunnel, can I get paid for that? Well, no, you can't, not with NRCS dollars. Two other things that will hold that up is not only do you need a contract, but you need to make sure that we have signed off, our archaeologist has signed off that the project is not going to disturb anything of cultural or historical significance. Sometimes it requires our archaeologists to come out and do a survey to make sure that we're not going to just be disturbing any known sites or unknown sites. So in addition to that, if there's any engineering involved, this is like all of the rainwater harvest catchment systems I mentioned, any irrigation project, we need to make sure that an engineered design is in place. We have engineers on staff, they do all that work. It's not an extra out-of-pocket expense. Same with our archaeologists, they're also on our staff, but they are few and the work is a lot. So that is where our bottlenecks come in. A lot of the time is being able to get those surveys done and the engineering design done. So think longer timelines for those projects. And if you get a contract with us, you complete the practices, like, okay, let's take the high tunnel, for example. You come to us, you got a contract for a high tunnel, you would go ahead and pay for the high tunnel, put the high tunnel up, whether you're paying somebody else to do it, or you're putting it up yourself or with a bunch of friends. We come out and make sure that it meets all of our specifications. And then we pay you the cost share rate based on whatever square footage is applied. Say we planned a 3,000 square foot high tunnel and you put in a 2,000 square foot high tunnel, we're only paying on that 2,000 square feet.
Hey, Stephanie.
Yes.
Did you also want to mention about the beginning farmer or socially disadvantaged option that can receive 50% cost share?
I sure do.
Okay.
I definitely do.
Just as an option.
So yeah, so what Raeanne was saying is that we have options for historically underserved producers. Please don't shoot the messenger. This is how NRCS defines historically underserved. If you follow that QR code, that'll give you some more information on how the limited resource farmer and rancher is determined. So that would be considered a historically underserved client. We also consider anybody who's been farming or ranching less than 10 years a beginning farmer or rancher, also HU producer, socially disadvantaged farmer, American Indians, Alaskan Natives, Asians, Blacks, or African Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Hispanics, and that's pulled directly from our policy language. Veteran farmer or rancher, those are folks that have not only been farming or ranching, less than 10 consecutive years, but they also must have obtained their veteran status during the last 10 years. Again, don't shoot the messenger on that one, please. So what does it mean to be a historically underserved producer if you're applying for NRCS programs? It means that you're entitled to a higher reimbursement rate. Depending on the state, we all kind of do this a little bit differently, but you get more ranking points when you are ranking and assessing those applications. And there's also, like I think Raeanne was mentioning, the availability of an advance payment option. So that's the ability to receive up to half of that cost share rate ahead of time. So take that high tunnel example. Say we were going to pay the cost share rate, it was going to be $10,000 for a high tunnel. You can get up to $5,000 of that ahead of time to help purchase that high tunnel. Comes with strings attached. So talk with your NRCS person to go over all of that, because if the funds are not expended on the what you were supposed to be using it for within 90 days, NRCS does come and take that money back, or try to. Just a note too, if you are talking with Farm Services Agency, they have different definitions for HU. Well, one specifically, they consider women as a historically underserved producer, where NRCS does not. Did I hit that?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't know you had this.
It's okay. I think this one's mine too. So I think, due to time, and I think Becca hit this at the beginning, we've been talking a lot about organic initiative and the Organic Transition Initiative. Those are all under this huge umbrella of EQIP funding, Environmental Quality Incentives Program. There's another giant pool of funding called CSP, Conservation Stewardship Program. Really for folks that are already operating at that high level of stewardship. One thing to note, if you are a small scale producer, something has changed. It used to be that there was a minimum of a $1,500 annual payment every year. They raised that to $4,000 a year. So if you do get a CSP contract, that's $20,000 for being a good steward over the course of 5 years. And then we are just one agency under the USDA. We were just talking, there's 29 agencies under the USDA. I don't know all of their programs by heart, or even a little bit. I can tell you that there are other USDA programs that might be of interest to you through the Farm Services Agency. They have a non-insured crop disaster assistance program. What's really big is they do have an organic certification cost share program. So I believe it's up to 50% or $700.
75, 750.
75%.
75%.
They changed it. 75% or 750, whichever is more.
Up to
Per what?
750.
Per scope. Thank you so much. And what I do know is that it is a limited amount of funding, and it's first come, first served, because I've had folks wait till the deadline and not get that reimbursement. So put in that application for reimbursement as soon as you can. And then RD, Rural Development, also has some programs that are available that might be of interest for folks. And I think that's it. It's Marina.
Just to continue the theme of other programs that can be supportive of producers as they're transitioning to organic. If you are transitioning to organic and you are going to NRCS for some of these conservation-related practices, I also recommend checking out the Transition to Organic Partnership Program. This is a really great program that can tie in to the support that you're receiving from NRCS. So if you're going to NRCS for things like adding a hedgerow, or developing a nutrient management plan, a pest management plan, you can also be tied into the Transition to Organic Partnership Program to receive one-on-one mentorship at no cost to the transitioning producer. They are hosting educational workshops, free events all the time. They have a lot of resources and free technical assistance on things like developing an organic system plan, developing a records keeping system, how to make sure that your operation is meeting the organic certification requirements. So the website for this is organictransition.org, and I just recommend checking it out because it ties in really nicely with the support that NRCS can offer transitioning producers to overall just sort of provide that wraparound assistance that a transitioning producer might need. And this is our all of our contact information here. This is also the link for finding an NRCS service center. So you can put in your state, you can put in your county, and it will come up with your local service center right there. And we'll take questions.
Uh-oh.
Could you explain how the Act Now Fund Pool works in Washington and what practices may be eligible under that program?
Why, yes, we can. So Act Now is a subset of EQIP funding. So, right, the more infrastructure, more immediate practices. And so there are many Act Now fund pools. The ones of the greatest interest generally are high tunnels and low tunnels are within an Act Now funding pool, which basically puts, so we just talked about, you know, come in early, come in often to talk about what you want to do with us, because it generally takes at least a year to go from you come in and you talk to us to you get a practice on the ground, like a high tunnel or whatever it is. Act Now accelerates that timeline quite a bit, and so because high tunnels and low tunnels are a little bit easier to do since a lot of times they're from kits and everything, and so generally there's going to be at least one, sometimes two, sometimes more funding cycles for things like high tunnels and low tunnels every year. And other things that are covered are things like forest management plans, organic management plans, soil testing practices, things like that. Is that what, please? These are some of our handy dandy local planners.
What if I miss the application deadline? Can I still apply for Act Now funds?
Well, yes, you can. And I'll also say this, like in general, we take rolling applications, like year round. Whenever you come in, put in an application with us, and like, yeah, you'll be on our list to like go and like talk to the next time we have funding, but also like sometimes it takes a long time to put a plan together. So it's not a bad thing to be planning like a year out for a lot of these practices. Rolling applications, so with the Act Now applications, it goes off of your application date when you sign that 10-question application with us, and so it's kind of a first come first serve type of funding pool, and so we encourage people to put in applications early and often for that, because the application date does make a difference for these high tunnels, low tunnels, organic management plans, things like that. So thank you.
We talked about two main programs that we do, eQuip and CSP. Are people allowed to join both programs at the same time, or are they gated function?
Well, yes, they are. You can have concurrent applications. A lot of times when people come in, we do encourage them to first go through eQuip a lot of the time. I liken it to like dating and getting married. You know, you kind of like, you're getting to know each other through some like easier contracts and applications like high tunnels and low tunnels or something. So, and you know, that's a kind of a one-off. So you're like, do we like hanging out together? Do we like working together? Most of the time it's yes, we do. And so, but you know, hanging out with the government and getting into a contract, it's a thing, right? It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of paperwork at first. So you figure out if you like dating us, and then you get married to us when you get a CSP contract, because it's a 5-year contract. So we're in it for the long haul.
Did I hear the low tunnel practice insect exclusion netting?
Well, yes, it does. Okay, so for low tunnels, low tunnels are inherently like a very, very flexible thing, right? And so we know that you're going to be moving the low tunnels over different beds at different points during the season for different reasons, right? You want to have frost protection, you want to have sunlight protection, right? You don't want all your crops to bolt. You need insect netting at certain points during the year. So we know that you're going to be switching out your different covers over different crops, over different beds at different points during the year. So yes, it is all included within that same set reimbursement rate per square foot of low tunnels. So whether you want one cover, whether you want 10 different covers, it's all going to pay the same. But I will say the reimbursement rates last year were pretty dope. So
They're still dope. And then you also get paid for managing those heights. There's a management payment. So there's a cost share rate for the initial year to purchase the materials, and then for the following 2 years just to manage them.
Hi, I'm wondering about, we have experience with NRCS. We've done high tunnel grants and fencing grants. Fencing was, I think, the IRA, and our farm also has EWP permanent easements through NRCS. I'm just wondering, in terms of going forward, we have a list of things we want done. Does NRCS help us prioritize the order of the projects we want to do in terms of both what's best for our farm and what we can deal with in terms of time and energy to put into it, as well as what might be funded first, what would be a higher priority for like getting funding, or like just the whole thing?
Yeah, I think this is probably highly dependent on the conservation planner that you're working with. The approach that I take is I'm not going to tell anyone what to do with their farm, because you know it 1,000 times more in depth than I do. What I can help do is just point out the different variables that might influence that decision, as far as the natural resource lens to each of those. So I think it's definitely not in our wheelhouse to give farm management advice, but we're just mostly focused on the natural resource concerns and how we could best address them based on your timelines, your capacity. But there are other organizations out there that might be able to help you prioritize. Becky, do you have a different viewpoint on this?
no, I mean, I agree. Because like really what we want to do is like help you think through your priorities, right? So we'll ask you questions. We'll ask about your operation, your management, your goals, your challenges, all of it. And so we're going to think through it with you, but we're not going to tell you what to do, because I mean, we can come up with what we think is a great plan, right? But if it doesn't work for you, if it doesn't work for, your operation, it's not going to help you, right? And so we want to help you think through these things. And like, we might recommend the order of operations that you might like want to consider, like you do big picture and then you finesse down into the detailed work, right? If you have a field of blackberry, that blackberry probably needs to go first, right? You know what I mean? And so that type of thing is where we'll think through the operation with you. Hey, planners from the Snake River team, what do you do?
It's kind of a hard question to answer because we can help you play the ranking game and understand that process more, but it might not always fit into your operations, so we are discouraged from planning things just to help you rank higher, because it also ends in more like contract cancellations than we would hope for. But typically, we do try and find like technical assistance for you to manage your farm better. We do take the human and management element into all the planning that we do. So it depends on the planner, but I definitely try and help people play the ranking game because I understand the importance of just keeping your farm afloat.
What a great answer.
I'm just going to say really quick, because we are in time, that I have the QR code up on the screen so you can fill out your evaluation and then paper evaluations. I'll stick them on the chair up front. We would like you to do that before you can leave. But yeah, just...
One quick thing I'll add to that is we have the ability to schedule practices multiple years, so you don't have to do all the practices within the first year of your contract. We can schedule different practices multiple years out into the future, so say if you wanted to do like a hedgerow planting the first year and and then a year down the road you want to do some irrigation later, we can plan things out multiple years to give you time to do different practices. So there's good flexibility with the program now.
And a lot of times, we like to plan it out a little bit more to give you that flexibility, because you can always do practices early as long as you have all of your surveys done, like cultural resources and everything, but it's hard to move things later. So, and we like to give you that buffer of time because we know farming is crazy, you know?
Just a quick question about ranking. As I understand it, you take the applications, you process them, you send them into a black box. And so one is I heard at some point that maybe things that were in an urban growth area might have an advantage, but then otherwise, I mean, we are relatively senior in the beginning farmer ranks. So we've got 10,000 square feet of hoop houses already. Does viewing us kind of long in the tooth versus someone who comes in with half an acre and no hoop house, who gets a higher rating on that?
It depends. So, well, so a lot, I know the ranking and assessment can be a bit of a black box. We do make all of the ranking questions available on our website for each fund pool. So you are more than welcome to go to each one of those, and it'll show you the ranking questions that we are answering, that we can answer. Some of them are geospatial, like out of our hands, like soil type, growing degree days, you know, what kind of climate you're in. And then there is a black box, and then there's a lot of math that happens behind the scenes, that efficiency scores and all sorts of stuff, and then it spits out a number. So for what it's worth, you can go on the website and kind of see what, like if you could say yes to all the ranking questions, you are like the ideal project that we're looking for. And we don't, we're not biased against, there's no ranking questions about size or scale or, you know, how much work you've done with us in the past. I do think, depending on the state and where you are, they might not fund you if you've canceled or been terminated, had a contract with us in the past that didn't work out. But other than that, I know you guys something.
And the ranking questions they change every year. Like we reevaluate them. If there's not a big, like we want to make sure there's like, you can identify the differences in each application. Like we're not all of them rank in a certain area. Like you diversify each application and they rank at a certain scale. So we try to make sure that there's like how we like fine tooth the ranking score. Like we just sit down as in the John Day Umatilla Snake River Basin. Like we sit down as like the higher ups and we kind of just go over like why are all these people grouped up? Like, can we change this ranking score or take ranking points away from this ranking question because it's not as big of a factor as maybe another ranking question that we have. So we try to, it's equal across all scales. So we don't, I mean, it's hard to explain how the ranking questions kind of worked out, but.
So us as an agency, our biggest goal is to treat the natural resource concerns that exist on the property. So all those ranking questions are getting at what can we do, what's going to be the application where we can treat or do the best work here, the best conservation work. That's what they're all getting at.
And then EQIP and CSP are very different when it comes to ranking questions. CSP, it's based off of your ranking, or based off your resource concerns that you're meeting at the time of application, and then after it goes through the whole system. We assess your application, and then after it shows like that your planned enhancements that you're planning in the contract, it shows the improvement on your ground and seeing if those resource concerns that you did, or maybe you might either exceed or change to meet, and that's kind of how that is different in CSP. Right? Like
That is a black box.
And that is a game that is very hard to play around with. And sometimes it doesn't make sense, and sometimes no matter what enhancement you put in, sometimes it just won't change over depending on like where you're located or the resource concern.
We do have, in Washington and Oregon are different again. But so in Washington we do have an urban agriculture funding pool, and it takes urban census data and puts a buffer on it. And so if you have 50% or more of your acres or your land under control in that boundary, then you are eligible for the Urban Agriculture Funding Pool, which is a separate pot of money. And then in terms of your question about being historically underserved, receiving that higher reimbursement rate for things like high tunnels, and you're at the end of that 10-year period, just keep in mind that reimbursement rates do change every year. They generally increase, right? And so if you schedule a bunch of high tunnels, like who knows how much the cost of materials could go up next year. I mean, we saw that with COVID, right, when everything skyrocketed. So it's a balancing act.
And also just to like add, I know we're done, I just want to add just a caveat to this whole thing. It all might change, like as soon as we get a new farm bill. So
Stay tuned.
Is there a notice that people who have further questions can ask you these questions?
what's that?
Should people send you direct emails
Oh,
if
sure.
they have additional questions or chat with you after?
Yes.
Chat with us after, holler at your local service center. Snake River team.
Thank you.